Okay, welcome to this explainer on business ethics, focusing on the real cost of asking, how should we live? Now, especially if you're an undergraduate business student, it's absolutely crucial to look at business ethics not just as some abstract, feel-good philosophy, but as a hard, data-driven discipline. We're going to take a very clinical, factual look at the financial and social impacts of corporate decision-making. We need to unpack the actual motivations behind why organizations sometimes make incredibly damaging choices. To give you an idea of the sheer skill we're talking about here, let's look at a staggering number. Workplace misconduct, and we're talking just based on fraud alone, causes an estimated loss of 5% of annual revenues globally. 5%! To put that into perspective, in 2009, that was equivalent to more than $2.9 trillion of the gross world product. So unethical behavior isn't just a PR problem. It is a quantifiable, catastrophic financial liability for international markets.
So here is our agenda for today. We'll start with the cost of corporate scandals, then move into culture, context, and misconduct. After that, we'll look at ethics versus the law, dive into a real-world case study with the Enbridge oil spill, and wrap up with practical, ethical decision-making. Let's jump right into Section 1, the cost of corporate scandals.
The 21st century has unfortunately given us some massive clinical case studies of systemic ethical failure. Take the 2001 collapse of Enron. That wasn't an accident. It demonstrated a corporate culture deliberately engineered to maximize financial gain by ruthlessly exploiting legal loopholes. Then look at the 2008 and 2009 global financial crisis. You had unchecked lending and trading that artificially inflated bad debt. What happened? It literally froze global credit markets and required trillions in government bailouts just to keep the system breathing.
And, ethically responsible business decisions have to encompass entities way beyond just stockholders. Think about the collapse of Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme. That fallout destroyed capital across a huge spectrum of stakeholders. We're talking investors, sure, but also businesses, schools, nonprofits, retirees, and entire local communities. When corporations extract wealth at the expense of external stakeholders, the institutional damage is just devastatingly comprehensive. Moving on to Section 2, culture, context, and misconduct. Here's a really uncomfortable truth. During economic challenges, observed workplace misconduct actually increases by more than 35%. Why? Because cost-cutting strategies, things like compensation reductions or hiring freezes, create high-pressure environments that actually incentivize illicit behavior. We see this pattern all the time in modern international corporations. When they're under intense pressure to satisfy shareholder yield, you'll see tech firms aggressively monetizing user data without consent, or pharmaceutical companies artificially inflating life-saving drug prices. The corporate social environment directly dictates whether ethical barriers hold up or collapse.
When we analyze that massive question, how should we live, it really fractures into two distinct concepts. On one side, you have personal integrity, which is individual morality, how I should live. On the flip side, you have social responsibility. That's about justice, public policy, and how we should live together. Business ethics requires us to analyze how corporations, which are hugely powerful social institutions, structure their decision-making to impact that broader societal well-being.
To really get this, we have to understand that business ethics operates as a normative discipline. Now, normative reasoning evaluates how people and institutions should act. This is different from descriptive social sciences, like sociology, which just catalog how people do act. Our objective here is to evaluate the core principles that impartially promote broad human well-being rather than just insulating and growing corporate wealth. Which brings us to Section 3, Ethics versus the law. This is a huge one. Legal compliance is absolutely not synonymous with ethical validity. Just because something is legal doesn't make it right. Ethical requirements might mandate actions that aren't codified in law at all, like simply treating your employees with fundamental respect. Conversely, legal permissions, like firing an employee for absolutely no reason in an at-will state, might completely violate established ethical standards. In fact, historical data shows us that corporate malfeasance is very often preceded by legal counsel confirming that a shady action is technically defensible in court.
Let's look at a practical example in human resource management regarding the Americans with Disabilities Act. Imagine an employee asks for accommodations for a severe allergy. Is that legally covered as a disability? Well, case law actually remains pretty ambiguous on this. Variables like the severity of the illness and the operational impact on the business prevent a simple, uniform legal directive. This perfectly demonstrates the limitation of relying solely on statutory rulebooks. Because the law is ambiguous, business managers are constantly going to face decisions that have to rely on their own ethical judgments. Operating strictly at the absolute bleeding edge of legal compliance exposes a corporation to severe risk. We see this today when modern tech conglomerates exploit gray areas in international data privacy laws. What happens? They routinely trigger massive governmental backlash, which then results in waves of highly restrictive, localized regulations. They basically force the government's hand.
Let's ground this in a real event in Section 4, the Enbridge oil spill. Back in 2011, an Enbridge energy pipeline leaked near Wrigley in the Canadian Northwest Territory. This spill directly threatened a local community that was entirely dependent on the local ecology for their survival. Enbridge responded by dropping a 600-page cleanup plan and offering a $5,000 allowance for the community to hire their own independent experts. Analytically speaking, what actually motivated that initial, frankly, tiny financial offer, and why did it trigger such severe community backlash?
The data shows a massive, critical misalignment in stakeholder perspective here. Enbridge was operating strictly under a framework of legal duty. They were just fulfilling technical obligations with a token financial gesture. But the citizens of Wrigley, they viewed the event as an existential threat to their environmental health and their way of life. By treating environmental remediation as a legal checklist rather than an ethical obligation to a community's survival, Enbridge suffered calculable, lasting damage to its corporate reputation.
So, how do we fix this? That brings us to Section 5, Practical Ethical Decision Making.
Business ethics fundamentally relies on practical reasoning. Now, theoretical reasoning is the scientific pursuit of truth, figuring out what we should believe. But practical reasoning dictates action. It determines what we should do. In high-stakes corporate environments, management has to execute rigorous, practical deliberation to formulate actions that yield structurally positive outcomes for everyone, not just the board.
So, the methodology for this ethical deliberation breaks down into 4 analytical steps. 1. Identify the social context and prevailing norms. 2. Isolate and genuinely consider all the affected stakeholders. 3. Look way beyond baseline legal compliance. And 4. Optimize for impartial human well-being. This sequence right here is what converts abstract ethics into a quantifiable, incredibly valuable management utility.
I want to leave you with a final operational question that the data forces us to ask. Is good publicity enough of a motivation for ethics? If international corporations only perform socially beneficial acts as a form of risk management or brand protection, well, their behavior is going to shift the absolute second that unethical actions become statistically more profitable. Evaluating the true, unvarnished motivations of global entities isn't just theory, it's a strictly required competency if you want to analyze modern corporate strategy.